All right, so now that you know the key pieces of the psychology that was being investigated by Dement and Kleitman, particularly remember this, that based on a 1953 study, they were exploring sleep cycles, they were looking at eye movements during sleep and how those are related to dreaming, and their focus was on being able to find an objective measure to understand this phenomenon of dreaming better. And so the background is very closely related to that psychology that they were investigating, of course, but just a little bit more about it. As you recall, in 1953, Kleitman, who was also part of this 57 study with his colleague Dement, Kleitman had worked with somebody named Aserinsky in 1953, and their work had helped them identify sleep cycles by tracking brain activity. In other words, in this 1953 study, Kleitman and Aserinsky established that EEGs were a good way to track sleep cycles. Second, they had realized that the accuracy of dream recall was going to be different based on the time at which a person was awakened. Third, they had also managed to establish that there was some kind of relationship between those cycles of brain activity and eye movement periods. And again, we'll go back here. We'll go back here to see this little diagram. And you can see in this diagram, non-REM, no rapid eye movement, sleep cycle 1. Non-REM, no rapid eye movement 2, cycle 2. Non-REM 3, which is again no rapid eye movement 3. And then you have rapid eye movement sleep. And so at each of these periods in time, you can see corresponding brain activity levels measured through an EEG. And this is what Aserinsky and Kleitman had already established in 1953. And so this provided the baseline or the foundation for Dement and Kleitman in 1957 to continue investigating.
Quick pause. If you're finding value in this explanation, there's so much more to discover at Alt Academy, where we break down every A-level concept with the same clarity. Now back to the video lesson.
Now, they wanted to investigate if there's a link between those periods of rapid eye movement that Kleitman and Aserinsky had established and our dreaming, or the period that we spend asleep but dreaming. And the second thing they wanted to look at was that using an EEG was obviously proved to be an objective measure of establishing that we move through different cycles of activity, brain activity, when we're sleeping. But they wanted to see, well, if brain activity, rapid eye movement, and dreaming are connected, then can we then use EEGs to establish an objective method, or to make it possible to objectively measure the times at which we dream, as well as to figure out if there's a relationship between our eye movement and our dreaming, and of course periods when there is no eye movement. Remember, we have rapid eye movement or REM periods of sleep. We have non-rapid eye movement or NREM periods of sleep. And so based on the psychology being investigated that we covered in a different lesson, when you combine that with the background that we're talking about in this lesson, you can figure out that the sort of motivation or the push, the foundation for Dement and Kleitman's 57 study was provided by the 53 study, where sleep cycles were shown to have been an actual thing that was measurable using an EEG. And second, that when we are dreaming, there is a relationship of some kind between our rapid eye movement periods and our dream recall. In 1957, Dement and Kleitman simply wanted to investigate further how they could more objectively establish that relationship between REM and dreaming, and to sort of see if there was a way to even take dream recall, which is such a subjective sort of thing where you can only ask a person to recall their dream, and they are only going to narrate to your personal experience. But in this study in 57, Dement and Kleitman also tried to sort of put an objective value to dream recall and to link it and to see if it could be linked rather to the duration of sleep, to the duration of rapid eye movement periods in particular. So in our next few lessons, we're going to look at how they did this. But before that, we're going to look at exactly what their specific aims were for this experiment. Now that you're familiar with the background of this study and the psychology being investigated, both of which are deeply related to a previous study on dreaming and sleep, focused on figuring out the patterns in individual sleep cycles. And that study took place in 1953. In this lesson, we're focused on a 1957 study by Dement and Kleitman, which was building off of the findings of that 1953 study. And remember that the focus for Dement and Kleitman remained on sleep and dreams and the relationship, particularly between the periods of eye movement and the lack of eye movement that occurred during a person sleeping, to the kinds of duration and the quality of their dreams, and of course, when they actually dreamed. And they wanted to figure out an objective way of establishing that relationship between eye movement periods during sleep and dream activity. So now in this lesson, let's look at the aims of their experiment. So there were 4 specific aims that Dement and Kleitman had identified, and all of these contributed to them being able to better understand the relationship between brain activity and eye movement patterns during sleep, and of course, dreams. And so the specifics of what they wanted to identify, the first aim of their experiment was to establish whether dreaming happens during both periods, no rapid eye movement and rapid eye movement. Because remember, in 1953, Kleitman had figured out that there are periods during our sleep where our eyes do not move at all, which are NREM or non-REM periods. And there are periods where we see a lot of rapid eye movement during sleep, which is an REM period. Second, they wanted to determine if participants were able to accurately establish or at least estimate the length of time that they had spent dreaming. And this is obviously important because it's a way of establishing that there's a relationship between the period spent sleeping and the duration of a dream. And they also, because the study was focused on eye movement patterns during sleep, they also wanted to see if eye movement patterns in some way or the other matched the content of the dream, not the duration, the content of the dream. So if a person was looking straight ahead, what does that look like? I mean, if a person in their dream remembered staring at something, then did their eye movement correspond with that? Did it remain steady and stable? If a person reported, for example, just looking up at the sky, did that same thing reflect in the pattern of their eye movement? In other words, did their eyes move up top? And last, the fourth aim was to check whether there was a correlation between the duration of REM sleep and the narrative of a recall dream, or the content, meaning the number of words. They were looking at the number of words because, remember, they wanted to find an objective way of studying dreams. And so they wanted to take that subjective piece of data and quantify it in some way. That subjective piece of data was the recalled dream or the narrative of the dream. And so they wanted to just look at the number of words and relate that to the duration of REM sleep. You'll remember that in a correlation, we're looking at whether X will correspond, not cause, but will correspond to a change of some kind in Y. And so they were trying to figure out if the duration of REM sleep was in any way related to the length of a dream, which was determined by the number of words, the content of a dream, not the length of a dream, which was related to the number of words in a recalled dream. So, is it possible? They wanted to see if the duration of REM sleep increases, does the number of words also increase, which would be a positive correlation, if you recall? Or when the duration of REM sleep increases, does the number of words in dream content decrease, which would be a negative correlation? So that was the fourth aim of their study. They wanted to see how the duration of REM sleep corresponds to a change in the number of words involved in dream recall. So these were the four aims. And as we move through this set of lessons, you'll figure out how exactly they tested for each of those aims. Now, the hypothesis of this study, even if it's an experiment, is not explicitly stated anywhere. So my suggestion to you is to remember these four aims very, very well. You have, and do remember them in the order in which they are listed, because it will make it easier for you to follow along when we get to our lesson on the results and the conclusions of this study. So remember aim number 1, dreaming. Does it happen in REM and non-REM periods of sleep? Aim number 2, is it possible for people to accurately estimate how long they've been dreaming for? Number 3, does the content of dreams match eye movement patterns? Do our eyes during sleep move corresponding to what we're seeing? And aim number 4, does the length of our REM sleep have any kind of correlation with the content of our dream that we are subjectively narrating? So that's objectively placed as the number of words in that dream narrative that is recalled by a participant. So 4 specific aims. Do remember them in the order in which they are listed. And remember that there is no hypothesis explicitly stated. Usually, for such research studies where a hypothesis is not explicitly stated, you can make some sort of assumptions about what the researchers might have been predicting. In this case, I would suggest that you stick with what we call a non-directional hypothesis, or you can think of it as an implied hypothesis. Non-directional refers to basically when a researcher does not predict the type of shift or relationship that they think they're going to find. And when you look back at this aim in particular, that they looked at whether there was a correlation between the content of words, a content of a dream, and the duration of REM sleep. There's no specific direction, meaning they didn't say that we want to see if there's an inverse correlation, which Baron Cohen, if you recall, had said. They just said we want to see if there is a correlation to begin with. So that could be one reason that there's no explicitly stated hypothesis. But if you really want to dig deeper, you can think about it as perhaps a non-directional implied hypothesis that there will be some kind of relationship between the content of dreams or the length of a dream narrative and the duration of REM sleep.
Hey there! If you found this A-level psychology lesson helpful, why don't you head on over to altacademy.org, where you can sign up for the full A-level psychology course. In addition to psychology, we offered 7 other A-level subjects. Thousands of students have already taken the leap. What are you waiting for? I want to see you there.